Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Tanya Shrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thadeus Greenson, and Arts and Features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both.
Hello. Those of you in Radioland cannot see, but just know that Tanya has, number one, cut her hair in a very fetching bob, and number two, has done it for costume commitment. For
It is.
There's no higher respect.
You know, every year it's always a struggle when you wear glasses to get an appropriate costume. This year, I got to wrap up, because I got new glasses, the perfect person to cut my hair and represent. So
Very excited.
I am so excited for my costume. Stay tuned. So, speaking of staying tuned, we have all kinds of stuff to preview for the next upcoming couple of weeks. And we're going to start off with Thad bringing us important information on the cover story. Thad, will you take it away?
Yeah, Tanya, this week we have a really thorough look at what makes housing prices so expensive in California and then trickling down to Humboldt County. So this is a Cal Matters story. Cal Matters is the Sacramento-based nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to analyzing California politics and policy. And generally we don't run Cal Matters content a ton, but we just felt the story was really answered a lot of questions that I think are pretty pervasive on people's minds, and certainly housing issues are every bit as real here in Humboldt County as the rest of the state. One of the things Cal Matters does really well is take like really complicated issues and breaks them into kind of bite-sized pieces. And so the story just really kind of goes blow by blow and analyzes just all the different factors that contribute to California's kind of inexorably high housing prices, which have been identified as a problem for decades and decades at this point. Every year we hear about new housing goals and how we're going to build those, 300,000, 3 million, whatever the number of the day is, new housing units. And they so rarely come to fruition. And so the story kind of helps explain why that is.
I agree with that description. I thought it was taking such a look at something that I had no idea all of the metrics at play there, and I felt very educated at the end of the article.
Yeah, I think it's one of these articles that at once makes the kind of the scope of the problem a little bit daunting, because I think so often that this conversation gets dumbed down into just talking points of it's environmental regulations pushing up the costs of goods and services, it's it's zoning restrictions, and really I think if anybody who walks away from this article will realize it is all of these factors. It is it is absolutely every aspect of California life and industry that makes it so difficult to build housing here. So just to, I guess, run through a handful of the key ones. Obviously, within the most populous state in the country, land prices are at a premium. So that is kind of a foundational issue in housing costs here. But then, I think some of the takeaways that I thought were really interesting were that when there was the Great Recession in 2008, there was a big contraction in the labor market in the construction trades here that has just never rebounded. And so, construction workers are at a premium. And for some factors that we'll get to, commercial construction is just a lot more lucrative for contracting firms. And so with this kind of labor shortage, a lot of it is being dedicated to commercial building as opposed to residential building. Obviously, I don't think it should be a surprise, but NIMBYism is a huge issue in California. Every city and county wants local control over zoning and over land use decisions, and that often leaves these decisions susceptible to kind of the whims of neighborhoods, and folks don't like change. And so a lot of times these things take communal sacrifice. To build housing units means somebody's view might be obstructed, somebody else's sunny backyard might all of a sudden be in the shade, those types of things, and kind of existing landowners are generally given a lot of deference in kind of these decisions on a local level. Let's see what else. There's another one that I thought was interesting, was just really kind of some of the regulatory things do make building here a lot more expensive, and especially the prevailing wage factor for projects that use government funding, and so that just really drives up labor costs on these projects, and then like I said, makes them more expensive. But I think to me, one of the things that I really didn't appreciate was that base level land value issue that we talked about a bit ago, and that because land itself is at such a premium, it really makes the margins on affordable housing, especially on lower cost housing, really marginal. And so, when folks do look to build residential, they tend to try to build higher end because it's more profitable.
Absolutely. And one of the things that fascinated me was also outlining the impact of previous propositions and how it factored in.
Yeah, proposition. I think the authors of the story do a great job of saying, there's nothing in California that Proposition 13, which capped property taxes, just hasn't touched. In addition to reducing a lot of local government, or huge local government funding stream, it also makes it just more affordable for people to stay in their houses longer and longer, which on an individual level is great. Nobody wants to be priced out of, in retirement, nobody wants to be priced out of their homes, but it does mean these homes aren't kind of going back on the market. People are less likely to downsize that 3-bedroom once the kids move out than they were, 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And what were some of the hopeful fixes in the future, or things that they were exploring?
Yeah, so the legislature has taken a lot of pretty proactive action in recent years to try to just get more building, and so one of the things was just kind of the ADU unit by right, and so virtually every residential property in California now, or every single family home has the option to build an accessory dwelling unit or a mother-in-law unit on their property, which again just kind of takes that out of the discretionary review process. So it used to be that folks would have to go to a planning commission, and and their neighbors might say, no, parking's at a premium in the neighborhood, you can't build an extra unit. But now it's by right. So that has, in some communities, that has made a huge difference, and we are seeing a lot of these built, both as a way to increase housing units, but also as a way for homeowners to to have kind of another revenue stream that can help them stay in their houses too. I think that was a huge one. And then, the state is just kind of getting a bit more aggressive as far as what it's requiring local communities to do in their housing units, to plan for additional building units, and then taking a more punitive approach if those communities aren't kind of stepping up to that challenge and following through, which is a pretty different, significant shift from the state's approach even like 15 years ago.
Well, Thad, this was a great article to include in the journal this week. Do you have any final thoughts before we move on?
I think just encouraging everybody to check it out. We did our best to kind of sprinkle in some Humboldt County specific numbers that I think localize the story, make it kind of at least illustrative of that all these issues are very pervasive here as well. But I think, as I said, I just think it really kind of gets past these simple talking points and really takes a pretty holistic view of the challenges. So I encourage folks to check it out.
All right, and I appreciate you discussing it with us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and we are going to come back to you. And for right now, I'm going to pivot over to Jennifer and see what we have going on in the community.
Well, I am very excited that this week we have a story from L.L. Kessner, who is our Art Beat columnist, and she has written a really lovely piece about Jerry Pruss. So Jerry Pruss is a So-Hum artist, a painter, and he recently had a retrospective at the Morris Graves Museum of Art in Eureka covering 50 years of work. And it's interesting, it struck me interesting partly because in 50 years, you really see somebody's progression. You really see sometimes a complete 180 from their start. Think about, what you were like in your 20s versus what you're going to be like in your 70s, right? It's a toss-up. You could end up anywhere. So
imagine you two in the 80s versus the 20 odds.
How dare you?
Sorry.
So L.L. Kessner had an interview with Pruss and talked to him about his work, but also spent a lot of time at the retrospective really taking apart and viewing everything and looking at influences, looking at movements, across time. And part of what I found fascinating about the story is in the opening, it says that Pruss was kind of on a search for something he can't quite define. And the paintings and the drawings document the search rather than the elusive object. And this is something that my husband and I were recently talking about in terms of the difference between writing a persuasive essay where you have a conclusion you've come to versus writing about trying to figure things out on the way. And you might contradict yourself, you might have things that you would go back and change, but it's about the process of trying, of moving toward a conclusion. And because we're word people, this is not easy for us. But Kessner does a great job looking at the work and really seeing the influences and the things that he's reaching for. She talks about his influences, like in the beginning, lots of Cubism, lots of Cézanne vibes. She describes this very earth-toned kind of still life with pictures and apples. I mean, could you be more Cézanne? But things get non-representational really fast. And from there on, it's a real kind of an exploration of fields of color, shapes, circles, geometry, things that were very, very influential in the 1960s. And I liked what his mentor, Howard Jones, said to him. He said, "You're free to do whatever is important to you. There are no rules." And I like that more than to do whatever you want. To do whatever is important to you, really, to me, that said something. And then she also talks about how painting, as he's looking for something ephemeral, and she talks about painting time and the passage of time, which is interesting in the context of a retrospective, that Pruss's work aims to depict something far more ephemeral than any object. And that she describes how he knows it when he sees it, and that painting is the way he's looking, which to me is really fascinating. And there are some pieces that involve text and words and things like that, but they're really not so much about the meaning of the words as they are about words as shapes, letters as shapes. And the meaning kind of is cut away from the words, or cut away from the shapes of the words. It just sort of becomes text, much like your cousin's weird Asian tattoo. So I'm sorry, we all know that person, right? Bless you
We
all.
do. It's nice that we have Google Translate now before we get those tattoos.
Listen, don't trust the computers before you get a tattoo. You need to have some Asian friends. That's just what you need.
Indeed.
But don't do it. But it was an interesting read for me, partly because, so often we read art criticism or we talk to artists and we think you should have the answer, right? That you can decode all of this for me. Or that we stand in front of work and we think, how do I get this right? How do I get the right answer from this piece? And really what you're looking at isn't somebody presenting you with an answer that you need to decode in this case. It is somebody's search that you're observing. You're looking at somebody who is trying to figure it out, trying to experiment and trying to come to something that even he can't really articulate necessarily every time. And I think that's kind of wonderful, because otherwise, if you could articulate it perfectly, you'd be writing. So I love this story. And the show is no longer up, but do not despair, because she includes the website in the article at the very end. In italics, you'll see there's a website you can go to that you can look at more of his work. And it's really worth looking at.
Absolutely. And I think it was really a great piece of description. And I mean, the basis of most art forms is the journey, the search. I like that aspect, not just, hey, this is what this represents, very black and white.
Yeah, I enjoyed that too. And I feel like what I enjoy about our art columnists over the years, over the last decade that I've been at the Journal, has been that their criticism in terms of their interpretation, their interest, their description of the work has made it more interesting when I get to the show. When I look at the work, I find things that I might not have paid attention to, or new ways, new contexts to think about it. And you don't really have to have any kind of art background or formal art background to get something out of them. And I really appreciate that, from L.L. Kessner in particular.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing that to us. Before I pivot back to Thad, I know that you probably want to discuss about some upcoming things real quick.
I do. It's spooky season. And not only is it spooky season, but we have kind of crazy timing. And Colin addresses this in Set List, which you should check out because he has lots of good stuff for us this week. He points out that because we have a weird midweek Halloween on Thursday, do you go crazy and Halloween it up on a weeknight? Do you wait for the weekend? Do you pregame on the weekend before? Well, this is the weekend before that we're heading to, and then into the actual holiday on Thursday, because the Journal's calendar goes basically from Thursday to Thursday. So Kali Kaziris, our calendar editrix extraordinaire, big fan of spooky stuff, has not only a rundown of all the trick-or-treat stuff you need to know. If you are planning to dress up a child and take them around for candy or hand out candy, you need to look at this. You need to survey the fields before you. And she's got the rundown on everything from McKinleyville down to like Ferndale. And it's just everywhere that you can go and have like a safe, controlled time and maybe not spend all night. They have an end time, parents. That's a really important thing to know about Halloween. Unlike trick-or-treating in a neighborhood, there's an end time. You can go home and eat that leftover candy.
And I think that's important because it's happening on a school night.
It's happening on a school night. And we've also got a couple of fantastic movies playing, one being Young Frankenstein, rhyming with Ovaltine, Frankenstein. And that is playing at the Eureka Theater on the 26th on this Saturday. And we have the Arcada Theater Lounge showing Frankenstein. Does not rhyme with Ovaltine, according to It's because you're asking. So you can watch the 1931 Boris Karloff, The Jaw That Launched 1,000 Screams is going to be there, and it's going to have a raffle and Halloween goofiness, and I believe a costume contest. So prepare to monster mash this weekend and next week.
All right. Well, definitely prepare for all the fun and spooky times. And with that, we're going to pivot back to Thad to talk about what else you need to prepare for just after the spooky times. The scare keeps rolling.
The scary times.
Yes, the scariness does not end with Halloween this year. So I did a story this week looking at voting options for folks. Apparently there's some confusion out there. We've gotten a number of emails from folks lamenting the closing of their normal polling location or wondering where they're supposed to go to vote. So when I was a kid, this is probably too much information, but when I was a kid, one of my standout memories is going with my dad to vote every election. He'd always bring me with him. And it was almost always in like a polling location in a garage at our neighborhood or something like that. Well, times have obviously changed. Actually, just before the pandemic in 2019, California passed a landmark Voters' Choice Act, which seems really new because, we've had some pandemic elections and things have just been weird, but it has actually been in place for some time. So under that act, everybody in the state gets a vote by mail, or every registered voter in the state gets a vote by mail ballot sent to their house. You can just fill it out and mail it back, and it's as easy as that. It has to be postmarked on or before Election Day. But you can also have other options of what to do with that ballot. You can take it to any number of drop boxes. There's, I think 20-something set up throughout the county at grocery stores and other kind of community centers. Those get emptied every day. They're locked and secured. You can also go to the Humboldt County Elections Office anytime now through Election Day and fill out a ballot there. Or you can go vote in person, which I still do because I'm dweeby like that, and now I drag my daughter along with me. But there's a lot fewer options of where to vote actually in person nowadays. So there's only 13 in-person voting centers set up throughout the county this election. Some of those, like the one at the elections office, open well in advance of Election Day. Some open 10 days in advance of Election Day. Some open 3 days in advance of Election Day. All this information, by the way, is on the Humboldt County Office of Elections website, and it should be in the sample ballot that you were sent as well. But I caught up with Registrar Voters Juan Pablo Cervantes, who just really wanted to get message out there that, you got lots of options. You don't have the same options that you had before, so that polling place that you've gone to for 30 years may no longer be there, but it doesn't mean that you have no place to cast a ballot. But it does take, voters to kind of at least look past their normal habits and kind of create a voting plan. Last thing I really want to point out there is you might have seen that the deadline to register to vote in this election just passed on October 21st. If you have not registered, don't freak out. California has same-day registration, so all that means is you can show up at the in-person voting center on Election Day and register and cast a ballot. Just means you're going to be casting a provisional ballot that won't be counted until they verify that you are in fact who you say you are and you're eligible to vote. But do not let missing that deadline deter you from voting.
Absolutely. And definitely look into it ahead of time. I know with the pandemic, I've been voting by mail, but I just had this conversation with one of my besties about I really want to go in person because it's important and I want to go back to being in person. But to do that, you got to make sure your polling place is still open.
And full disclosure, I mean, 2 years ago, I think it was 2022, I showed up at where I've always voted, at Azalea Hall in McKinleyville, and there was no polling place there. And I was like, uh-oh. Turned out that they had just moved to a polling place a little bit down the street at McKinleyville Middle School, so I only had to run a couple blocks over to cast my ballot. But yeah, it's good to check before you go.
Have a plan. I know we're very fortunate here in California that we don't have to usually run too much of an obstacle course, but make sure you check and have a plan. Thank you, Thad. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick, last thing I'm going to say is if you are planning on voting in person, bring that vote by mail ballot with you. It makes the process a lot smoother. You just turn it in and get a ballot at the precinct, as opposed to them having to do a bunch of stuff.
All right. Thank you, Thad. Thank you, Jennifer. And that wraps up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick up your copy, or of course you can check it out at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying informed and extra spooky supportive of our North Coast community.